After leaving the grocery store, Grace Adler was caught in a sudden downpour. When she was struggling with her umbrella and grocery bags, John offered to drive her home with a warm smile. Grace recognized the man from somewhere as she looked up at him. Despite her reservations, she accepted the ride. Although Grace hesitated for a moment, she finally agreed to the ride, figuring it was just a short trip and she didn't want her groceries to get wet. Upon entering the car, she recognized the guy as John, a neighbor she had known since he was a child. The atmosphere inside John's car was friendly despite the fact that she knew he was reserved. Things were about to change, however. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Grace was glad to have some company. She had little human interaction after her husband died, except for when she went to the grocery store and to the pharmacy for her monthly medication. There were only 2 cats in her household, Toby and Marvin. Despite her love for them, she sometimes missed having more human contact. He was a friendly man, and he reminded her a little bit of her own son, Joey, who lived all the way in the West. It was far away from San Diego, and Joey had promised his mother that he would bring her to spend the holidays with them. "Thank you so much for taking me on this ride. It was really nice of you to drive me home. By the time I got home, I would have been soaked. Your mother raised you to be a gentleman." There was no doubt in Grace's mind that John lived just a few houses away. From what she knew, he lived alone and rarely interacted with others. There is little interaction between him and her now. The fact that he would even give her a ride home surprised Grace, who thought he was an introverted person. Her curiosity was about to be piqued. The entire drive was quiet for John. Grace, however, immediately spoke up when she saw that he had driven past their street. "We missed our street, John. Can you tell me where we're going? My cats are waiting for me. It's time for me to get home to them." Suddenly, he spoke up. "My apologies, Mrs. Adler. If you don't mind, I have to stop at the hardware store." "I won't take long." Grace wasn't expecting this new turn of events. She just wanted to go home and see her cats. She now faced a longer day than she had anticipated. She was an elderly woman. This level of kindness had not been shown to her for a long time. She thought John was very sweet, but there was something about him that she just couldn't pinpoint. Grace looked out the window as they drove to the hardware store. John hopped out of the car as he parked it. "It won't take me long, Mrs. Adler. I just need to get a few essentials." Grace nodded in agreement. "I understand, John. You have all the time you need." John returned from the hardware store after 15 minutes. His trunk was full of everything he bought, and he got into his car. "It's raining cats and dogs outside, Mrs. Adler. How about we get you home?" The words he said could not have made Grace happier. Grace was relieved that they were finally heading home. She wanted to make some soup and sit back and relax with her cats on her lap. To her, it was the perfect day to be doing just that. However, there was just one problem. John had decided to take the longer route home. He was leaving the town altogether. Where were they going? "Isn't the countryside beautiful, Mrs. Adler? I always wanted to come live out here with my mother. That was my dream after I came back from deployment. Did you know I was stationed in Iraq for 3 years, Mrs. Adler?" Grace had heard from her fellow neighbors that John was a Marine. Unfortunately, when he returned, his mother had passed away. "Yes, John dear. I knew that you served our country. I'm so grateful for your service. I think the whole neighborhood is." That's when Grace noticed that John had turned onto a gravel road. The gravel road seemed endless, winding through thick woods with an eerie silence settling in the air. Grace felt a chill run down her spine, and a sense of unease growing within her. As the car rumbled along the desolate path, Grace's mind raced with uncertainty. She clutched her purse tightly, stealing glances at John, who remained stoic, staring ahead. Fear started to creep into her heart as questions piled up. Was this a mistake? Should she have declined the ride from this mysterious veteran? Summoning the courage to break the silence, Grace asked John, "Why are we on this road?" "My house isn't this way." His response was a solemn nod without a word, intensifying her anxiety. The gravel road led to an old wooden house surrounded by overgrown vegetation. John parked the car, and the tension inside the vehicle reached its peak. "Mrs. Adler," John finally spoke, his voice heavy with an unexpected burden. "I wanted to show you something important. Something that has haunted me since I returned from Iraq." He opened the car door, gesturing for Grace to follow. As they approached the ominous house, John's demeanor shifted. He seemed haunted by memories as he fumbled with the keys to unlock the door. Once inside, John led her to a room filled with dusty old photographs, military medals, and a weathered American flag. With a heavy sigh, John began sharing the tragic tale of his time in Iraq, the comrades lost, the battles endured, and the haunting images that replayed in his mind. Grace listened, her eyes filling with empathy and sorrow for the veteran whose scars were more than just physical. "I wanted to move to this cabin with my mother, but she's gone now. So I was wondering if you could move with me here. We're both alone, and I think we can look after each other. My mom liked you, so I can't think of anyone better to be my second mom." Grace's jaw dropped. Never had she expected John to ask this of her. She felt like she needed to leave immediately. She took a deep breath and decided to remain calm. She was sure that John wouldn't harm her, but there was no way that she could stay with him in that cabin. "John, I like you very much, but I can't move to this cabin with you. I have my own house and my cats are waiting for me. So why don't you take me home, please?" At that moment, John's face changed. He went from looking kind to looking very angry. "Why won't you stay with me? I helped you. I gave you a ride when no one else would. You owe me, Mrs. Adler." Grace didn't know what to do. She was sure that he was suffering from some form of PTSD as well. She was an elderly lady in the middle of nowhere with no phone. What had she gotten herself into here? She decided to think. She decided to take a kind and sensitive approach. She could see that he was hurting and he was missing his mother. She decided to be the maternal figure that he needed at that moment. She went up to him and gently touched his shoulders. "John, dear, I know you're hurting and I know you miss your mother. She was a wonderful woman. But I can't take her place. I will be your friend and I will help you and be there for you whenever I can, but you have to take me home." Would John change his mind? John finally looked up at her. There were tears streaming down his face. She didn't know if she was out of danger, but she felt his warm embrace and knew that she needed to be there for him no matter what. "Mrs. Adler, if I go to the therapist tomorrow, can I come back to your house again, please? I just need to be around someone right now. I don't know what I might do if I'm alone. I don't trust myself. I've seen too much." Grace smiled. "Of course, dear. You can stay as long as you want to or until you feel better. I don't mind the company at all." It was then that the two of them headed back home. As they drove back to Grace's house, John remained silent, lost in his thoughts. Grace couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and compassion for the troubled veteran beside her. Upon arriving at her cozy home, Grace invited John in, assuring him that he was welcome. The cats, Toby and Marvin, curiously inspected the unexpected guest, their eyes reflecting the dim light of the living room. Grace set about making the promised soup, all the while engaging in a comforting conversation with John. She was just grateful that she was home and that she would help John in whichever way she could. As they sat down to enjoy the warm meal, the atmosphere gradually shifted from tension to camaraderie. Grace sensed that John was opening up, sharing fragments of his life and experiences. It became apparent that he was a wounded soul in need of healing, and Grace was more than willing to offer her support.